Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Kalen DeBoer, Michael Penix, the Washington Huskies take down the Texas Longhorns, book their ticket to the national championship playing my Michigan Wolverines. We're going to do a game preview for that later tonight, but I want to dive in to this matchup against the Texas Longhorns and talk about a few things that, if you're a Washington Huskies fan, make you feel really confident about how Washington matches up against Michigan in the national championship. Really excited to get into this one. Watch the game back this morning. Have some notes and takeaways that I want to talk about before we get into it. Just want to say thank you to you guys and a special shout out to the Washington Husky fans. This has been a program that we've talked a ton about during the 2023 season, and the support the Washington Husky fans have showed the boys has truly been phenomenal. Cannot thank you guys enough. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Later today, we're going to take a deep dive into this Washington-Michigan matchup for the national championship. And again, as a Michigan fan, this is going to be an extremely fun game. And many of you guys know how much I like the Washington Huskies as well. So really excited to get into that later today. If you guys do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. And without further ado, let's get into what we saw from the Washington Huskies last night against the Texas Longhorns. And I have a few apologies that I need to make. One, going into this matchup, I think the large talking point was, can Washington on the inside of that offensive line hold up against the big dogs that they had and the Texas Longhorns? And there was a part of me that was saying, I don't think Washington has seen a defensive line, especially on the inside, that the Texas Longhorns were going to bring to the table last night. And I said that's why I think Texas might win this football game, is because I don't know if Washington can hold up. And this is a Joe Moore Award-winning offensive line for the Washington Huskies. I doubted them. I shouldn't have been doubting them. You take a look at what this offensive line did. Only 8 pressures given up, 0 sacks. This was an offensive line that, yes, they are a little bit smaller than some of the guys that they had to block on the other side of the line of scrimmage. I thought they did a phenomenal job, especially in pass pro, working, keeping Michael Penix clean. And we've said this all year. When Michael Penix is kept clean, he is the most dangerous quarterback. This passing attack is the most dangerous passing attack that you see in the entire country. And that is exactly what you saw. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is, we said this was a game of styles and a game of matchups, right? What matchup was going to be the differentiator in this game? Was it going to be that Texas defensive line versus the Washington offensive line? Or was it going to be the Washington wide receivers versus a Texas secondary that was probably the weakest part of this team heading into this matchup? And we got our answer last night. Michael Penix, one of the most impressive quarterback performances that I can remember in a college football playoff game. And yes, CJ Stroud had a phenomenal game against Georgia last year. What Michael Penix just did last night was not only the stats. You look at the box score and what he did, that was phenomenal, but the throws that he had to make and the playmaking that he displayed when he had to bust out of the pocket and make plays outside and kind of extend plays with his legs, that was an all-encompassing game. And some of the throws that Michael Penix made into tight windows, layered over zone coverages, some of the most impressive throws that we've seen all year. And you look at Michael Penix's numbers, pushing the ball down the field, 10 of 13, 10-plus yards down the field. You add that 6 of 8, 20-plus yards down the field. Extremely accurate, hitting the big play, and that kind of was the story of the game. Could Texas limit those chunk plays through the air against the Washington Huskies in that passing attack? If they could, that would bode very well for the Texas Longhorns. They simply couldn't. And I don't even know if it's a knock as much on this Texas secondary as much as when Washington is playing that way, that's kind of the ultimate trump card. There's not much you can do. I mean, there were times where Texas defenders were in very good positions to make plays on the football, and Michael Penix and these wide receivers just flat out beat him because they were playing at such a high level in this passing attack. And one of the things I had a buddy text me, who would you rather play, Texas, Washington? And about midway through that first half, I said, probably Texas, because this Washington passing attack, when it is cooking, when it is on point, there's not much you can do to stop it. When you have an NFL quarterback surrounded by 3 NFL wide receivers who are all fully healthy, that was a Washington team that, playing that way on offense, there's not many defenses, if any, that can stop what the Washington Huskies are trying to do. Another thing that I kind of want to talk about in terms of recapping this game, and something that I probably missed on, is for the month leading up to this game, we talked about this matchup in multitude of different ways. And one of the things I talked about and harped on was, what is Coach Sark going to do with a month to prepare an offense and an offensive game plan against this Washington team? And I completely ignored that on the other side, you have Kalen DeBoer and Ryan Grubb, who are just as good at dialing up offense than Coach Sark is. And what you saw was Kalen DeBoer, Ryan Grubb come with an offensive game plan that was phenomenal. I mean, everything they were doing was really working. And yes, when they tried to run between the tackles, maybe that was not the most success they've ever had. But when they wanted to get the ball out to the perimeter and force Texas to tackle in space, that was working. When they wanted to attack the deeper third and hit some of those chunk plays, that was working too. Kalen DeBoer, Ryan Grubb, absolutely dialing up plays that Michael Penix and these wide receivers were just executing. So as much conversation as we wanted to have regarding what Coach Sark could do scheming up an offense for him with a month to prepare, we should have been talking about what Ryan Grubb and Kalen DeBoer were able to do as well. And the last major takeaway before we get to the defense is having a healthy wide receiver room was so massive for Washington. And we said this could be an X factor. And I think a lot of people who were knocking Washington and saying they're maybe an overrated team heading into this matchup didn't appreciate that Washington and these wide receivers were playing banged up for a majority of the month of November and October. And so when you saw them have a month off and to get fully healthy, we've always said, yes, Rome is your guy at the wide receiver spot for Washington. But when this Washington offense is truly at its peak, when it's truly firing on all cylinders, Polk and McMillan are playing a major role too. And you look at the box score, Rome goes 6 for 125, Polk goes 5 for 122, McMillan goes 5 for 58. That is how you want that box score to look if you're Washington. And then you have to give a shout out to a few other guys, right? Jack Westover is, just a clutch guy. And that's exactly what you want from a tight end, right? You have all this talent at the wide receiver position to hit those chunk plays when it's 3rd and 6, and you need someone to create separation and make a play. Westover was that guy for Washington, a massive, massive player in this game that is not going to get the appreciation that Michael Penix and Rome got. But man, I thought he was phenomenal in some of those bigger moments. And then a shout out to Dylan Johnson. Obviously, the Washington run game didn't quite get going, but you had to stick to it to a certain extent. And when the chips were on the line and you had to pick up a 4th down, like Dylan Johnson showed up, and he obviously wasn't 100%, but that kind of just speaks to this team and the culture that's surrounding this team, because he was playing clearly not at 100%. I'm hoping he can get healthy for this national championship game. He runs the ball extremely hard, and I'm a massive fan of what he brings to the table. So you saw this Washington offense, and I guess the one other thing I have in my notes and kind of my takeaway is Washington forced Texas to play the game on their terms. And we said heading into this one, if Texas is able to establish the run, control the time of possession, kind of limit this game from being just a track meet in terms of just trying to outscore each other, that was probably going to favor Texas. With Washington getting up in the 3rd quarter like they did, they kind of made it a track meet. And that's how Washington wants to play, because when Washington is firing on all cylinders with that offense, I don't think there's another offense in the country that can keep up with the Huskies. So again, looking forward to that Michigan game. That's another key thing that we're talking about is, can Michigan kind of limit the track meet feel to this game? And if you're Washington, you want to challenge this Michigan offense to outscore you. Because if you get into that type of game, if you're a Washington fan, you're feeling good about Washington outscoring Michigan in that offense. And Washington forced Texas to play in a little bit of a track meet. And I think that was a massive difference maker in that game. Now, the offense, obviously just a phenomenal performance. Going back and watching it, you almost appreciate it the second time, some of the throws that Michael Penix made and some of the plays and catches that the wide receivers made. But the defense, I thought, really held up for 3/4 of this football game. And you have to give a massive shout out to a guy like Braylon Trice. And we talked all month long about, can Washington hold up in pass protection against this Texas defense? Washington turns around and has more quarterback hurries and more sacks than the Texas Longhorns. They had 10 quarterback hurries, 2 sacks. Obviously, a shout out to the All-American Braylon Trice, a guy that many Washington fans who've been listening for the last couple of months said, we back in October said if this Washington team wants to achieve their goals, which was a national championship, I think we saw Washington as a true national championship contender after they beat Oregon earlier in the season. We said Braylon Trice is going to have to be that guy. And Braylon Trice certainly showed up when the moment was the brightest. He had 5 quarterback hurries. He had 2 sacks. I mean, that was a massive difference in this game. And the other X factor to this Washington defense, another guy that we've talked about extensively throughout the years being one of the most impactful transfers across the country, was Jabbar Muhammad. Faced 7 targets, only gave up 3 catches. And that 1 catch was just, you just got to give it up to Jordan Whittington. Going up over Jabbar Muhammad making a play. Outside of that, Jabbar Muhammad was tested, and he held up in a massive way against Texas wide receivers that are going to be playing on Sundays in the next couple of months. So Jabbar Muhammad, a massive story in this game. And the last thing we talked about was Texas trying to get their wide receivers in space and working after the catch. This was one of the best teams in the country in terms of yards after the catch, averaging around 190 yards after the catch per game. They held them to 138 yards after the catch all game. And you look at this Washington team, there were not a lot of missed tackles in the back end. When Texas wide receivers were able to get their hands on footballs in space, Washington was largely coming up and making plays. And so a lot of the keys to the game that we talked about that could have gone either way, and if Texas had the advantage in yards after the catch, if Texas had the time of possession, if Texas was able to keep Michael Penix off the field, we said Texas probably wins this game. Washington won those battles. Washington won in the time of possession. They obviously won in the turnover. They obviously were able to hit the chunk plays in the passing attack. And if you're a Washington Huskies fan, I think the number one thing, and I'm thinking about this because you guys know I'm a Michigan fan. The number one thing if you're a Washington fan is, can that passing attack replicate what it did last night for 4 quarters against Michigan? Because if they can, and this is coming from a Michigan fan, there are not many defenses. We got the best defense in the country. There are not many defenses that can touch it. Because it's not reliant on what the defense is doing. Like when Michael Penix and these wide receivers are playing to their best of ability, there's not really a defense that can stop that. So I think when you look at this game, Washington kind of has the trump card in terms of that passing attack, just kind of being unstoppable at times. I'm extremely excited for this matchup. Later today, when Dale gets ready, we're going to be recapping this or game previewing the Michigan-Washington national championship game. Washington fans, can't thank you guys enough for rocking with the boys all year long. We got one more game to talk about. Appreciate you guys rocking with us. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later.